Welcome to What's on Your Bookshelf, a life and leadership podcast where we live out loud the pages of the books that are on our shelves, with your hosts, Denise Russo and Sam Powell.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of What's on Your Bookshelf. This is our life and leadership podcast where we're living out loud the pages of the books on our bookshelves. My name is Denise Russo. My co-host and friend is Sam Powell. And today we are introducing the second book that we have for the year. And before we do the introduction and tell you what it is, we'll do a little bit of a wrap up of where we've just come from and why this next book is a good segue for the year and for our series. And Sam we did an episode together where Sam outlined why we picked what we picked for the year, but maybe we can even give some highlights on that. How does that sound, Sam?
Yeah, that sounds good. So this year is all about decluttering your life. And so the 4 books that we picked for the year are really about decluttering certain big aspects of your life, usually the places that get a little cluttered. We just finished Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess, which is really all about the research and the science and just a path to declutter your mind. And that, I think, was a really powerful journey. I know we are still working through some of those cycles for ourselves because it's a 63-day cycle of cleaning up your thoughts and your mental mess. And so we are decluttering still in some aspects in our life. And I found it to be very, very powerful, but I think it was a really good way to start the year with just some grounded psychology, grounded research in really the foundation of our entire lives, which is our thoughts, our brain, our body, and getting that right first as the tone for the year. So I enjoyed that journey a lot. And if you haven't listened to those episodes, please go back and do. It's definitely a good way to, I think, just ground yourself in decluttering your life.
I really enjoyed that first book, Sam, because I had it on my shelf for a long time, but didn't deep dive into it. I'd read the surface. I knew what it was sort of about. I had seen the author speak and I just liked her. And so that's why I bought the book. But these last several weeks, we really focused on our internal selves, which was so important about how our thoughts get formed, how toxic patterns take root, like her example of using a tree as an example, and how what we repeatedly think begins to shape not only our emotional lives, but the way we lead our lives at home and at work, and how we respond and decide and engage with the people that are around us and the people that we care most about. And some of the takeaways for me was that when we talked about awareness or interrupting our default reactions to certain things was really powerful, because we can get stuck in this spiral. I, even as early as just before we clicked record, was getting stuck in a spiral about something that I'm dealing with right in front of me right now. But when we talked about intentionality, it really reminded me of this. Every morning I read a daily devotional before I start work and my day. And the one I was reading yesterday was basically saying, you can ruminate all you want about whatever happened yesterday, but it doesn't bring it back. And you can fear and even get excited about whatever you think tomorrow is going to be. Even you and I just talked about all the what ifs of tomorrow.
Yeah.
And that's not promised to us. And if you do those things, then you miss the gift of being present in your moment right now. And so one of the things that I treasure about our time together is this is a way for us to have this captive time to be fully present in our thinking, in our feeling, in our sharing. And that for me is what's real about reading these books out loud and taking the deep dives together.
Yeah, I love that. That's such a great analysis, because it really is. I think when you're thinking about decluttering your life, it is about presence. It is about stopping and taking a moment to notice, right? Our thinking patterns, our emotional patterns, the physical patterns around us, or maybe the digital patterns around us too. And I think that that's so powerful. And taking this time with us, like you and I do this, but hopefully people are doing this along with us, but taking this time to just be intentional, pause for a moment, and figure out what you're going to do about it is extraordinarily powerful. And what we learned from the last book, the right way to really change your life in significant ways, right? That deep thinking is critical.
I think that the great thing about that book is that it showed us things like, how do you renew your mind? How do you change old stories you tell yourself? How do you start responding instead of reacting? But just like last year when we did the series of, but what happens when life happens and the obstacles are in our way and you have to un-F yourself and all that stuff, or you have to make bold choices in life. The reality is you could get your mind right and then open up your computer or your phone and be facing 3,000 unread emails. Maybe you look at a calendar that you've double booked over really important meetings you need to have. Maybe you are sitting in a workspace that you and I both talked about before we clicked record that reflects maybe a little bit more chaos than it does clarity. And so we're operating inside these systems and in work right now for a lot of people that reward speed over meaning and busyness over impact. And so at some point, I think we have to ask ourselves, like, if I'm working this hard to clean up what's really happening in my mind, and that's what we did with Caroline Leaf's book, then why am I still living inside a structure, whether it's in your home, in your office, in your job, in your car, that create stress that you're trying to dismantle? And so that's why this next series is such an important progression. And before we introduce the book, I want to say that this was an interesting book to pick because there is a precursor or a prequel, I guess, to this book that we're doing that has been life-changing, pun intended, literally for me. And it prompted us to decide not to do a certain book in favor of doing the book we're going to do. And so, Sam, maybe let's talk a little bit about why we picked what it is, what it actually is, and then we can go into a little bit more detail to prep people to get the book and get ready.
Yeah, because we were thinking about this year of like just decluttering, everything going on, right? If we think about our bigger arc of this podcast, we started with the Coach Wooden book, really around like principles to live your life. And then we zoomed in on the atomic habits of like how to, I don't know, just how to get things moving and kind of take control of the little spaces in your life. And then we moved on to a whole year of like, you just said, I just want to be happy, right? And like, what does happiness really look like? And how do we achieve that? And then we knew on the other side of happiness, there's still problems. There's still, big things and big obstacles that get in our way. And so we spent that whole year doing that. And when you spend work on, I think those big things, like things get cluttered, right? Like things just get messy. And we need to take that step to look at those pieces of like, okay, how do we pull it apart? How do we organize? How do we get it to a place where we can bring the joy back into the little spaces and kind of the day-to-day spaces? Because we know how to become happy. We know how to work with the obstacles. And now it's, well, how do we, declutter in ways that are really impactful? And now that we know how to declutter our mind and to make that work for us and clean up that mess, I laughed because when we were talking about this, the book you reference all of the time felt like the natural next step here. And then we were like, what? I don't know, right? Like maybe not. And then you suggested this book. So the book that you talk about all of the time is really about cleaning up the clutter in your life. And you can talk about that because it's one of your favorites. And I think we have 15 or 20 episodes where you mention it.
So the life-changing magic of tidying up is the book we're talking about. It's not the book that we're going to be doing. Okay. So if you want to go buy it, maybe what we'll do, Sam, is we'll put the links to both because it really is. If I had to say that, if you ever ask me what are in my top 10 favorite of all books, it for sure is in the top 10. And that's hard for me to say because I love reading. That's the reason we have this podcast, but it's in the top 10, The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up. And I received the book at a time when I needed it the most, probably, which is why sometimes these books will resonate with you deeper if if you're going through something. Like the entire year of happiness was a powerful year for me when we did those books because I wanted to be happier than I was. And same with The Obstacle is the Way. When you mentioned Atomic Habits, it's almost like there's sort of a winner of the series of the year. And I would definitely say for me, you mentioned them already. The Coach Wooden book was a life-changing book for me as well. And so with Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up, my mom gave me the book. And I don't think she gave it to me to change the way that I looked at decluttering my heart and my brain. I think she was giving it to me because I needed to clean my living room. And my mom's always,
Mom.
yeah. Mom is like Southern
Subtle
living
hint.
at home, Betty Crocker, like anybody at any moment could walk into my house growing up and smell fresh cookies, like no doubt. And it wasn't from a candle, like they were real. And so my mom gave me this book. And when my mom gave it to me, it was a fascinating gift because it was my mother's book first. And my mom had those little flags on almost every single page, Sam, and underlines and highlighter marks. And that was at a time when that was a phobia for me. I was the person that, oh my God, you cannot even make like a binding mark on your binder. And are you kidding me about writing in the book? And so my mom gifted me the book with all of her notes and her marks and her thoughts and her tabs. And I was like, oh, well, what am I do with this now? And
I do love the irony of her giving you a very untidy version of the tidying up book.
Yeah.
Like, I do enjoy that.
I'm gonna have to pull it off the shelf and like show it one day on one of her videos because you're just gonna be like, yeah, okay. So anyways, this book in essence then spun off into Marie Kondo having a pretty popular, I don't know, streaming show of some sort.
Actually,
Where all
Netflix,
she really has done, yeah, Netflix
like series
is it?
on it.
Something.
Yeah.
Her job is to go help people throw stuff away in their closets, basically. But
Yeah,
she
come
does it
on.
from this very like Zen mindfulness perspective. So as I was reading the book, my mind always takes books and spins it to the what can I do with this at work? That's again why we started this podcast and why the way that my leadership development programs were always structured to use things like Pixar movies and Disney themes and all that kind of stuff. And so when I finished reading that book, it became one of my favorite books to talk about on all these episodes because there's something magical, truly life-changing magic if you can remove distractions. And so that leads to this book. So she wrote a second book called The Joy at Work, and it shifts the focus really from the internal clutter of our mind, which is what Caroline Leaf's book was about. And we now look at like the external alignment of all the stuff that's around us, all the people that are around us. And I almost feel like, Sam, that this book is how we came up with what the theme was going to be for what all the books were going to take us through this year because there's all the external things that we have to face. But if we don't get our internal selves healthy first, it doesn't matter what's going on around us. We're not going to get it right.
Right. Yeah. And you said the title, but this is Joy at Work by Marie Kondo and Scott Sonnenschein. And it is really about, I love the back of the book. The workplace is a magnet for clutter and mess. Who hasn't felt drained by wasteful meetings, disorganized papers, endless emails, and unnecessary tasks? These are the modern day hazards of our jobs, and they can slowly drain joy from work, limit our chances of career progress, and undermine our well-being. There is another way. And if that's not like the best setup to this book, like I don't know what it is. Like that's really what this is about. This is about kind of taking those concepts from the life-changing magic of tidying up and applying it to work in both what she calls the, digital data, time decision making, networks, and both the physical and non-physical spaces, really, like your actual physical office or space that you work in, and all of the digital, non-physical things that become a total mess. And, it just reminds me of, I remember desperately trying to get my email under control when I was working in customer support because it's constant notifications, constant emails. And I spent like a year trying to on a mission to figure out a system that worked for me. I would sit down with random people in the organizations who seemed to have a good system. I was always asking about it, being like, who's got a good email system? Who do I get responses from? Feels quickly or like on top of it. And so I would sit down and be like, hey, this has nothing to do with our actual job function, but I would like you to show me your inbox and tell me how you make it work. And I probably talked to, I don't know, like 10 different people throughout the year, played around with stuff. But like when I think about that, like decluttering and like finding joy in work, like I love organization, like organizing something and it feeling like clean and crisp and beautiful makes me so happy. Like it does really bring and spark joy in me. And it's always the first thing I think about was like my email journey in like the kind of middle point of my corporate career, because I was getting, tens of thousands of emails every few days. Like that's like it was insane. And getting to a point where I had a system that worked for me felt joyful.
Sam, I get an alert probably once a week that's like your Gmail is hitting its limit. It's going to block you from getting any other incoming
No
emails
more
if you don't
emails are
delete some
coming.
stuff.
Well, that's one way
I
to clean it
eh,
up.
I'm so terrible at it. And so I have, if I'm going to look at my phone right now and tell you, I have right now unread 2074 emails, but
Uh-huh.
total emails in my inbox is in the thousands, and I'll never get to them. But there's just something about like thinking, oh, I want to hold on to this one because I really liked this article. I really want to remember this. And you're never going to remember it. You're never going
Right.
to. I had this one manager one time, it's a person that you know, and he would not leave work if there was an email in his inbox. And I used to ask him, like, how in the world can you just get it to zero? And it wasn't like a thing where he would just go shove everything to, I'll read it tomorrow or put it in
Yeah.
an archive. He's like, look, if I know at the end of the day I can't take an action on this thing or it's not important to me or I can't respond to the person, I just delete it. Now, it's kind of a downside as well because sometimes I'd be like, God, I really need him to respond to this thing
And
that
you're
I
like, I bet he
sent.
deleted
And
my email.
he deleted the email. So there's that too.
I
But a
mean, that's
couple
a
years
bold
ago,
way to live.
oh yeah, he was super. I mean, like religious about making sure it was empty. A couple years ago, um, I had it was like World Boss Day or something like that, like Happy Boss Day,
Yeah.
and I got this cup, of which in my office I can't tell you right now where it is because I need to clean my office. But the cup basically says like just another email that or just another meeting that could have been an email.
Yeah.
And I think we've all dealt with that. And so part of the gist of this book for me is that it isn't even just about our messy desk, which it is as well, but it's also about what are the commitments that are draining or directing your energy. Like, are you
Yeah.
having meeting after meeting after meeting, or you go from meeting to meeting, you don't have time to breathe and break? And one time, a couple years ago, Sam, when we were in the same company together, one of our friends, Michelle, was teaching this class. Here's a leadership development class about how there's this thing called switch tasking, which is that if you go from meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting and you never have time for your brain to relax, and I think we even learned this in one of the books that we've done so far, is that switch tasking actually damages your neural pathways and your thinking, and it actually creates less productivity and worse quality in your productivity than if you paused. So I think this book will help us with, are you making the things that matter the most the priority, and then, say yes to the best and no to the rest kind of a thing? And then on top of that, something that you're great at that I want to get better at is like workflows and process and habits. And are they
Yeah.
really supporting your intentional leadership, or are you just kind of going with the flow and,
Yeah.
begging for Friday and dreading Monday? Like, what's your process that gets you through your days? So this is really a life and leadership book. It's not just about work, but in a way it kind of is. It's about getting your work right in your mind, in your relationships, in your office, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, like this couldn't come at a better time. And like we say this all the time, like it just seems to happen. But for me, like I've been running my business for almost 3 years now, which sounds crazy to me. But like if anybody's ever started something from scratch, while you're doing that, like while you're building, while you're experimenting, while you're trying things out, things get ultra cluttered and ultra messy. And so I've actually spent all of this month cleaning up. What are my offers? Where am I leading? What am I trying to accomplish here? Where am I spending my time? And so this book could not come at a better time for me because I just streamlined a whole bunch of stuff that was like like digital clutter on my website, on my on my Substack, on like all sorts of things that needed cleaned up. And so now that I've sort of got that center point clear and in my head and on paper, on digital paper. Now it's, I'm ready for like the rest of it. Okay, well, what do I do around all of that to really find this joy and bring this space into what I do? Because I was talking with somebody the other day and they were talking about, I think we were talking about people who are trying to figure out like one of my friends, their child is about to go into college. And so they're trying to figure out what major to choose, like what to do with the rest of their life type of a question, which like putting that on 17-year-olds is insane to me still. But the the she was asking for advice, right? Like what would you tell somebody? She's like, the advice my child has gotten a lot is around do something like find something you love and you'll never work a day in your life. Like that was the advice she got over and over again. And I just don't think that's great advice because like how do you know what you love when you're starting out, right? And how many people choose most people choose a major and never touch it again later. Right? Like that's the story of all of my clients, every single person who comes and talks to me mid-career. And instead, right, what I think about and when I'm giving advice, if somebody were to ever ask me, is you have to find things that you love the process of. The process brings you joy, the bits and pieces of it. Because it might sound great to be a teacher, but if you don't love creating curriculum, if you don't like matching that curriculum to standards, if you don't enjoy grading, if you don't enjoy coaching students, if you don't enjoy classroom management, if you don't enjoy the processes that you do day in and day out, there's no joy to it. And if those are cluttered and messy and you have no way of like grabbing a hold of them, you burn out on something maybe you do actually love because it's just messy. It's just uncluttered. And like, that's like, I'm really hoping as we explore this book that that's what I get out of it is how to find these pieces in my processes for work for me to make them joyful, to make them something that like, I just love this process. Like, and I think that that's like, I don't know, like that excites me as we sit on the cusp of like this next adventure.
I agree with you. I think that in your example of the mom and the student, John Maxwell has written a bunch of books and has a brand new one coming out that are about this topic, which is that you have to fail forward, meaning that if you only experience what you might think is joyful, it kind of dilutes the joy of it. And so
Yeah, I love that.
yeah, and so you have to go through things to see what you do want, not just what you don't want, but what you do want. And I was talking to somebody not long ago, and all they kept saying is, well, I don't want this, and I don't want that, and I don't like this, and I don't like that. And I was like, well, what do you like? And it was hard because they were harder to give you that answer. It's easier to say the things that you don't. And a couple of years ago, I was coaching these two individual young early talent. They both had the almost exact same job. One of the young people was from one side of the country, and the other one was from another side of the country. And both had parents who guided them to both get degrees in what would become potentially lucrative careers in a certain industry. We'll call person A and person B to protect the innocent. But person A hated their job, came to work every day crying. And I asked the person, well, what do you like to do? And she didn't name anything that she liked about the job. She named things like, I like to paint, I like to go to the theater, I like to be creative, I like to be outside. And I was like, well, do you do any of those things at work? She said no. And then I said, well, what are you going to do about it? And she told me, Sam, nothing, because my parents brought me to this country and said that I need to have this kind of a career and that this is the way forward. And so I know that for the rest of my life, I'm going to be stuck. And I thought to myself, it made me so sad that they thought they were going to be stuck. Then there was this person B. Person B was in a role they didn't like and proactively did something about it. Same things they didn't like as far as what they didn't like about the job itself. But then when they realized what they did like, which is actually to be a teacher, the person first looked for a fellowship in enablement, adult enablement and learning, and then realized through that process that they really wanted to do that for younger people and to be like a mentor stewarding down. The person ended up leaving their tech career. Sam went to become a teacher and in the first year got an award as like new teacher of the year and found joy. And the fear the person had was that they weren't going to make enough money to live. And so the point is what you were saying earlier about process. They mapped out like not just what do I need to live, but what do I want to be able to live the life I want? And can I make that work? Because the reality is, if you do just want to go painting and walk in the woods, you might not be able to afford that to do that if you have a lifestyle and high rent and stuff like that. So that was number two. There was a third person. A third person worked on my team and cold turkey. First of all, very high potential, amazing person, poised for succession, and decided one day they wanted to quit. And I asked the person why. And she said, because I don't want to get to the age that you are and look back and think, what did I miss? And so the person ended up leaving their job and went backpacking throughout like Europe for a year. And then I touched base with them about a couple months later after they started their journey. And she said, I've never been happier and more at peace while I'm trying to find out who do I really want to be. And I was so proud of her and kind of jealous too, because they made that decision. However, you and I talked about before we got on the microphone about the hazard of just making rash decisions. And so some of this book is about stewardship of your attention, energy, and time and your environment. But maybe talk a little bit about how, you jumped into being an entrepreneur after working in the corporate world. That's not for everybody. And just because something looks shiny doesn't mean that it is.
Yeah, because I think we get distracted, right, with like what are the glamorous aspects or what are the certain parts of something. But then where we stall is the stuff that we don't enjoy, the stuff that doesn't bring us joy. And so we avoid it, right? Like, and a great example is like, yeah, there's a lot of people who, especially in like the job market now and things like that, they're like, I'll just do my own thing, right? Like, I'm just gonna, start my own company. I'm going to start my own paid newsletter. I'm going to start my own insert whatever, thing, entrepreneurial journey they're going to do. But the hardest part of starting your own thing, consulting business, company, whatever, is client acquisition, right? You have to find people who want to pay you money, and you have to be good at convincing people that you can offer them the solution that they're looking for, right? So you have to know a whole lot of stuff to be able to do that. And people miss that part of it. They see, oh, I can be my own boss. I can do whatever I want. I can blah, 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 blah. But then what happens is they either just don't get to the revenue goals that they have, the practical parts of it, or they hustle, 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 and then they're more burnout. They're more of, chained to the thing that they've built because they didn't clean up the mental part of it, right? They didn't clean up the non-physical parts of what's going on. And so I think that that's, really what you've got to think about when you think about joy at work, when you think about, really tidying up, it's all of that together, right? It's, do I have a grounded, realistic view of what needs done around me? And can I get down to the most simplified, joyful way to go about achieving those specific needs that I have. And I think that there's a lot of very grounded energy in that. It's a lot of looking things in the mirror, like looking yourself in the mirror, looking reality in the face and saying, okay, this is what that looks like. This is what this journey will be. This is what I need. And then finding the path forward to it, the joyful path forward to it.
The joyful path forward. So next week, we start chapter 1 of the book. For this week, I want to encourage you to start first with cleaning up your mental mess if you're new to our show or didn't go through that book, because that's the architecture of our thoughts. And this next series really does invite us more into examining the architecture of our lives. And so, whether the way we're structured is actually aligned with the kind of leadership in life we want to say that we want to live or not, that's what this next book is going to be about. Now, we're out of time for today, but we'll have links for how you can get a copy of the book. It is not required for you to listen to our show and have the book, but it's always a better choice for you to have a deeper dive for your own personal life. We're going to tell stories about how it's impacting our lives, but having the book for yourself kicks it up to another level where you're able to apply it for yourself as well. Sam, is there anything else for our listeners for today?
No, I am looking forward to this joyful journey ahead to making our work something that we want it to be.
Me too. So, my name's Denise Russo. On behalf of my friend Sam Powell, and for everybody out there that's listening, that's joined us on the journey and about to continue forward on the joy at work, this has been another episode of What's on Your Bookshelf.